Limerence, limerence, and more limerence. We are absolutely steeped in the torment of limerence on this channel right now, aren't we? You've been sending your questions and I've been thinking of the best way to answer them. So today, let's dive in with the most common question of all because I think it's a really good start. Hands down, the most popular question has been this: is limerence love? How do I know that it's not love? And how can I be sure that's not what you're asking me to give up? And that is a fair question because nobody wants to give up on the opportunity for love. I get that. Nobody does, myself included. But the answer is not that simple. I know the popular opinion is that it's not love. And I think that if you want a simple, quick answer that is actually meant to help you, that has good intentions, then that's the right answer. But some of you are doubtful of this answer, and it shows in all the questions you've sent me, and rightly so, because I think you can sense that it's a little bit more complicated than that. So is that answer a little bit reductive? Yes, in a way it is, because it's it has the air of assuming that you are a person who cannot be trusted to hold a difficult problem in your mind and to make a hard decision about it. But is the answer intended to hurt you? I think it's just the opposite, because a lot of channels that talk about limerence also talk about trauma. And because of this reason, most of their advice is meant to help you not re-traumatize yourself in some way, not make decisions that lead you toward more trauma. They are meant to help you make decisions that work in the favor of a stable and emotionally regulated life. So I think the answer is reductive in your favor, and to help you get through to the other side of one-sided or unrequited limerence. And speaking as a person who has also come from a background of trauma, I can safely say that I myself have made some poor decisions when I've been dysregulated, because at those times I've been much more likely to involve myself in situations that hurt me and that work against me. But the answer I'm going to give you today is one that asks you, dear watcher, to hold the discomfort of a little ambiguity and to make the hard decision that only you can make. And I'll tell you why. Because I think that when you make the decision, you'll stand behind it. Are you going to enjoy the process of really considering this question and turning it over in your mind? Maybe not, but let's do it. Let's get into it. Is limerence love? Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we talk a lot about emotional dysregulation, about childhood trauma, and how those things might shape the way that we relate now to other people in our life. And we do this because we want to live lives that are healthy and meaningful and, for the most part, lived on our own terms. With your help, this little channel has grown from 300 subscribers to almost 3,000 in just 2 weeks, which I think is incredible. I definitely did not expect that. And I just want to say, I see you. I see your familiar names coming back to watch more. And I'm so glad that this content is resonating with you and that it's helping you in some way. So thank you for being here, because it means a lot. So far, the most watched videos on this channel have been the ones about limerence, which makes sense. Because this experience, this limerence thing, it is hard and there is a lot of pain in it, and it can be so confusing to know what's what when you're in the middle of it. So starting today, I'm launching into a new series on limerence, but this time answering some of your biggest and most common questions. The questions you've been asking in emails, in comments. We're going to take our time with these and to help you sort out what's going on and what's at the bottom of these limerent experiences. Because most of us are out there looking for some kind of connection. And when we find someone who feels fated and destined and intoxicating to us, the very last thing we want to do is to give that up because some lady on the internet says, hey, maybe this is not the right path for you. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow and I appreciate it so much.
Those of you who've been limerent maybe once, maybe several times, you know how powerful that initial spark can be. After the first contact you have with this person, all you want to do is connect to them more. And sometimes that happens in a flash of an instant in one meeting. Sometimes it happens a little bit more gradually. And if we were to look at just that first part, at that glimmer, at the first phase when you're just attaching yourself to the idea of this person, and we consider the magnetism and the infatuation that happens in the beginning, we might easily confuse it with a crush or with infatuation. And that's exactly why we even talk about it in those terms, so that we can identify ourselves in it. Because that first part of limerence can feel amazing, especially if you become involved intimately or if you've entered into a beginning of some kind of relationship with this person. But then all of this raises the next obvious question. If it feels that good, well, why can't it be love? Why aren't we supposed to just dive into it and enjoy it? After all, a lot of things that turn into love start in the same way. You have a crush or you're infatuated, you connect with someone, you go on a few dates, and soon enough you might move in together, start a life, have children, and of course you would call that love at the end of the day. The same thing can happen with a friendship that slowly becomes something more. So then why is limerence so different? Because when you're searching for videos on limerence, you're most likely, 1, involved in a case of one-sided limerence, which we can also call unrequited romantic obsession, or 2, you're in the last phase of limerence that may have started out as mutual, but now either you've started to wake up or the other person has started to wake up, so you're no longer at the initial height of limerence. You're at the point when things have started to fall apart in a way. And that's when limerence shows up as a lot of emotional and even physical pain, which is probably why you've looked for limerence videos. Sometimes, even if it starts off as mutual limerence, if enough time passes before you can turn it into a relationship, it gives one or both people time to wake up and to really start questioning their choices. The biggest enemies of limerence are truth and time. Time allows limerence to go through the full cycle of connection or infatuation and crystallization and then obsession and last deterioration. Which means that if there are enough real obstacles to forming a relationship, things can start to fall apart in that time. And in either of these scenarios, you would very quickly see that limerence is not just a crush, and it's not just infatuation. It's actually two things happening at once. And you sort of have to think of limerence in that way, in terms of its duality. The initial high, yes, that part looks like an intense and consuming crush. But then it quickly morphs into something else, which is the obsession and the rumination and the fantasy and the projections and the emotional volatility that you feel when you're deep in it, because you get stuck in that dopamine loop that we've talked about in other limerence videos. You cannot split limerence in half and pretend that only the good part exists, because they come as a pair. So when people ask, why can't we just enjoy limerence? Why can't we celebrate how beautiful that initial spark and connection to another person feels? Because limerence, in all fairness, some of you have said this, is some of the height of what the human experience can offer us. That part is true. Absolutely, I'm in agreement. But the reason I don't focus on it in the videos I've made so far is because we have to remember that limerence is a package deal. And that package includes both the thrill of the connection and the bonding, and on the other side, the torment that usually follows. You don't get to keep the glimmer and infatuation and toss aside the obsession and anxiety and rumination and annoyance of potentially being stuck in that state for sometimes for a very long time. And unfortunately, that's usually how limerence works. It comes as a package. What goes up at the height of limerence must always, always come down. Even if we enter a relationship based on mutual limerence, it always comes down. So then the next question in this sequence is, and it's another very reasonable question, if it starts off feeling amazing, especially if you've actually connected intimately with the other person, why can't it just turn into a stable and loving relationship? The answer is it can. Of course it can. And what I want you to understand is that on this channel, most of what we've talked about so far is one-sided limerence, or limerence that doesn't for some reason develop into a relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean it's entirely one-sided. Sometimes, as I mentioned, it can start off as mutual, but because of whatever impediments or blockages to forming a relationship, the limerence fades for one person. Or it goes through the whole cycle and then the whole thing falls apart before it's had a chance to form into a relationship. That's mostly what we've covered here. Limerence that is either one-sided or that degrades before it turns into a relationship. But there's no reason you shouldn't know that mutual limerence can lead to a relationship. It can even lead to marriage. If two people are both limerent, they can very quickly go from meeting to forming a relationship to marrying and to doing all kinds of impulsive things that end up binding them together. Relationships do start this way. And people who tend towards limerence can tell you that their major relationships usually start this way. And those are usually the white-hot romances that go from 0 to 100, while everyone around the couple wonders how these two people have lost their minds. That includes second marriages that start in very hot and fast affairs that are often fueled by limerence. And those affairs tend to burn through the rest of your life like your life is a house made of paper. There is not much that stands in the way of two people who are hovering around the height of limerence together. That's why those situations can be so destructive. And mutual limerence has its own pitfalls, its own problems. Most of those problems revolve around the big letdown when one or both people fall out of limerence. And both people do eventually come out of it. It's not a question of if, it's only a question of when. They just don't usually come out of it at the same time. So one person comes out of limerence first, looks at the other person, and doesn't see the same things they saw before. These relationships are often marked by a major deflation, that deflating balloon of what was there in the beginning. And that's a whole separate problem that we can talk more about on this channel. But what we've talked about here up until now has mostly been limerence that doesn't lead to a relationship. And it's because it's not likely to be mutual. But let's say that it did happen, that you and the other person became limerent when you met. Let's say that you hooked up with someone who was able to share in your limerent feelings with you. Well, then it would go from the crush or infatuation stage straight to a relationship in the fast lane, because the other person would assure you through their actions and intentions and feelings that they were on board with the same expression of love and they had the same intentions. And you just move on to having a relationship, because you cannot stay stuck in limerence when the intensity and feelings of love are mutual and where there are no barriers to starting a relationship. Very important. There has to be mutuality of feeling and mutuality in intention, and preferably no significant barriers that stop you from actually starting a relationship. And when the ambiguity and uncertainty of, are we doing this? Can we? Should we? When those questions are resolved and answered, then the uncertainty dissipates, and so does limerence. And I can only try to say this to you kindly, as I wish someone would have said to me at some points in my life. If you were part of that statistic, the mutual limerence that turns into love, it's unlikely that we would know each other, because you'd be on YouTube watching videos on how you and your lover could retile the kitchen backsplash together. Or you'd be looking up videos on why you tragically fell out of love with your partner and now you don't know how to get that height of feeling back, which is one of the problems of mutual limerence that shows up later. But you likely wouldn't be here unless you were familiar with the language of limerence. If you didn't know about limerence, you'd most likely assume that maybe you were wrong about being in love in the first place, and that perhaps you'd made a mistake, or you'd fooled yourself about being in love with this person in the first place. It's hard to come down from the height of limerence smoothly. But at least you would have progressed from the beginning stages to having a relationship, because both people would have turned to each other and said, do we want to do this? Yes, well, fantastic, let's do it. And you would have turned it into something more than just a beginning. And you likely wouldn't be here watching these videos. But if you are here and your partner is not beside you watching these videos with you, what's most likely is that the other person was perhaps not limerent at all. Or maybe they were at the beginning and the feeling passed for them. And then the whole thing fell apart. Because it's really difficult to go from the first phase of limerence to a relationship when only one person is limerent. It's hard to navigate the discrepancy in intensity between a limerent person who's up here and a non-limerent person without the whole thing fizzling out. It's possible if both people are very emotionally even and stable and preferably securely attached, but it's unlikely that you can navigate that transition with a person who's very anxious and one who's an avoidant. I do not wish that impossible task upon you. All of this just leads back to the core issue in most limerent dynamics, an imbalance of some sort that is usually based on one of the following. The other person doesn't love you, or doesn't share in the same feelings, or the other person loves you, but does not have the intention to create a relationship with you. And that is why a good portion of limerence is situationships or trauma bonds. Or the other person loves you, has intention, but cannot fulfill the real obligations or requirements of having a relationship. And the list of reasons for that is long and varied, and we don't necessarily need to get into all of the reasons in this video, but there are obviously very real reasons that two people might not be able to start a relationship. It could be because they live really far away, or because they're already in relationships or marriages with other people, a common limerence scenario. Because all of us have some requirements that go beyond just, yes, go ahead and love me. We have other needs. Like, you love me, therefore you cannot also sleep with Bob next door while you sleep with me. Or you love me and therefore you must live in close proximity with me. Or you must share a household with me so that we can do this life together. You cannot live in Baghdad and I live in Connecticut. Or I want to have children and you are absolutely allergic to that idea altogether. So all of us have very realistic and very real requirements for love. And those must be met for us to, engage in relationships a lot of the time, right? You can love someone and you can have good intentions, but you might not be able to fulfill the real requirements of what it takes to make a relationship. But these are all reasons that many limerent connections don't evolve into love, because there's a built-in obstacle. There's something cooked into the dynamic right from the beginning that blocks it from progressing into a relationship. And at the same time, the blockage and uncertainty get you stuck in the limerence limbo. Somewhere in the progression between, hey, we're good at this together, and a real relationship, something goes wrong. And that's how you end up getting stuck. So could limerence be love? Or could it turn into love? For sure, it can. But you don't usually stop on the way there to ask yourself, is this limerence? If it's going in that direction, right? Still, who am I to sit here and tell you that your brief, intense connection with someone cannot be love? I get why people push back on this question. Some of you have written things like, why do we have to deny the beauty of this magical connection? Why can't we just enjoy it? And more videos will come in this series that answer these exact questions. But you know what? You absolutely can, right? You are an adult. At the end of the day, you get to decide what you value and how you live. You get to choose beauty, even if it does come with pain. But limerence that doesn't turn into a relationship, it most definitely guarantees quite a bit of pain. And if it doesn't look like something reciprocal, if there's no shared future, no commitment, no peace, then only you can ask yourself if to you it's worth it. And if you decide that it is, then by all means. But could a one-sided episode of limerence or unrequited limerence turn into love? Could a trauma bond even turn into love? Sure. Just like the price of bread could go back down to $1 a loaf. Is it technically possible? I guess. Is it likely? Not really. And that's the point. We don't live our lives based on what's technically possible. A lot of things are technically possible. We live our lives based on what's probable and healthy and repeatable. Yes, limerence could evolve into love if both people are mutually limerent, emotionally available, relatively stable, preferably securely attached, and aligned with what they want. Yes, a trauma bond could also transform into something healthy if both people do deep inner work, sometimes apart, and then circle back as two new people. But if you're watching this video, then you probably already know that it's not going that way. So no, I can't tell you that your painful romantic obsession is secretly true love in disguise. I'm here to help you stop waiting for the $1 loaf of bread and start living in reality. So limerence is one possible beginning of love, but the foundation of a limerent episode makes it more risky because it's based on so much fantasy and projection than it is based on vetted compatibility. Usually you only find out if you're compatible later when limerence cools down. So even if you could call it love, that doesn't mean you should stay trapped in it. You don't need to steep in obsessive romantic misery just because it started out beautifully. That's why I don't focus too much in these videos on whether limerence counts as love. Because once you're asking that question, you're already sort of teetering on the verge of giving it more weight and time than it needs. You're asking those questions at the point at which you're trying to justify if maybe you can find a way to stay in something that's now hurting you. So instead of asking, is this love? I'd rather you ask yourself, is this good for me? Is it good for my nervous system being involved in this situation? Is it leading me down a path I want to go in my life? Do I want to be stuck for the next decade or two in an obsessive, one-sided, or impossible romance if it's going nowhere? And if not, then maybe the most loving thing you can do is to walk away. So let me know in the comments, do you think limerence is love, or is it just something that kind of looks like it? I'm curious how you feel about it. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing, liking this video so we can keep going together. Until next time.